Hello, pianists, teachers, colleagues, and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach Warrior Song, which is an etude, Op.45, No. 15 by Stephen Heller. Stephen Heller was a piano teacher and pedagogue from the 19th century. He wrote a lot of really excellent pieces for intermediate piano students. And I bet you have students who want to play pieces that sound as impressive as this one does. Here's what it sounds like. And of course, on from there. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson, and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. This is such a great piece for that impressive sound with big chords and a minor key, as I said. It almost has little twinges of the first movement of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata kind of idea, much easier than that. So this is a great preparatory piece for that. And because of that, this does show up on my Not Ready Yet resource, which I will tell you all about at the end of this video. The main feature is those big chords leaping all around the piano, requiring a very big, full sound. And I'm going to talk about leaps and big forte sound towards the end of this video. I'm going to start with a few smaller things and typical problem spots for students. Main features beside that is that we're in D minor and we have a modulation to F major. A lot of the chords in this are quite simple, so this is a good little theory exercise for students at the upper intermediate level to think about relative major and minor and what the primary chords, D minor, A major would be the dominant. He uses A minor a little bit, going to F major, and just some basic chords along with some fully diminished seventh chords, which provide that a little bit of dissonance and drama and feeling of intensity. So it's a good idea to look through the chords here because it's a limited palette of harmonic content. As far as preparatory activities go for this, I would say that this should not be your student's first piece with a lot of four-note chords. We have a lot of other intermediate repertoire that just includes a few four-note chords. And before I taught this, I would make sure my students are practicing four-note chord inversions. I start that with broken because a four-note chord does require a very wide, extended hand. And some students who can play octaves with relative ease at the upper intermediate level struggle with four-note chords. So don't assign this to a student unless you're confident that he or she has a big enough hand to navigate this and that they've practiced four-note chords. So we would start with broken. If I just take D minor, we would play root, first inversion, second inversion, root, and then come back down just like this. And of course you can work on that hand separately first and then go to hands together. Then I would repeat this with blocked four-note chords once that's ingrained and they're using good fingering. I do recommend using the fourth finger on first inversion because this is a better place to spread than spreading so far between these two fingers. So the fingering is 1, 2, 3, except that first inversion where you put 4 on D. So again, now moving to blocked inversions. And just like octave technique, I would be encouraging my students to contract back to a natural hand position, not an extended, stretched one, but contract back between each four-note chord. Yes, they have to feel the shape and memorize that feeling of how it is, but they do not need to stay in that shape in an extended physical way. So we have to encourage our students to practice this, to stretch out, to feel that wider open hand, but yet to not stay in that and create a lot of tension in their hand. So as I said, choosing any of the chords that would belong in this piece, D minor, A minor, F major, any of those, doing those activities would be a prerequisite for me so that I know that they can comfortably play four-note chords in that blocked technique and they understand the process of relaxing between them. Do note there are a couple of five-note chords in this as well, such as left hand measure 3 plays a fully diminished chord. That is a big stretch. Now I don't have a huge hand. You can tell I'm not a very big person. And I can reach that chord, and some of that is actually all about moving your arm in alignment. If you're way over here and twisting your hand, then you won't be able to reach all of those notes. So this is a more comfortable place. I would say if that's the only chord your student cannot reach, I would be tempted to just remove the top G and have them play that 4-note diminished 7th chord. But again, don't give this to a student with a hand that cannot navigate these big 4-note chords. There's a spot where a lot of students struggle to play accurately. The main one is measure 14 to the downbeat of measure 16. Similar content happens on 6 to 8. This is where there is just more movement. So that measure 6 version starts on G minor, and while the right hand stays pretty close, the left hand is doing a lot of movement. So that part sounds like this. And you could probably see as I demonstrated that my right hand didn't move, but my left hand was doing this. That's heightened in measure 14 to 16 because the right hand also does some octave displacement moving like this. We've modulated to F major. We're starting in the middle of bar 14 on a B flat chord, and it moves in to B flat here. That goes up an octave, comes back down, and then lands on A. So if I play that as written, you can see all of this stuff happening. We're going to talk more about leaps in a second, but just to say that that's a spot you want to go over for accuracy with your student and make sure they understand just each individual chord. What are they playing? And this one is a little bit different. So they do need to take time to make sure they're playing accurately there. So much of the other chords are more repetitive than that part. There's also a hemiola in the middle of this before you return to the A section. It's all on the same chord. It's all this C sharp fully diminished 7th over A, which you could explain as a flat 9 if you wanted to as well. But basically, we've got this A7, this dominant 7th harmony traveling back to D with that colorful note of the B flat. So in the top part, it ends up being voiced like a fully diminished 7th chord, again, over the A. And it starts with this 3-1, 3-1 rhythmic movement, and then the hemiola comes in, 3-1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And students often lose the beat here, and they seem to be completely confused as to where we are in the meter. The hemiola is supposed to make it feel like you've moved out of the regular meter, but your student has to know where the emphasis is. And throughout this piece, we have so much 3-1, even just the very, very beginning, that caret accent over the first downbeat, besides the fact of just how meter works, tells us that the downbeat is more important. So we always have this gesture of 3-1, and that should still be true in measure 17, going into 18 and 19. 3-1. So ensure that you talk with your student about the meter, that from the very beginning, as well as through that middle part that takes us back to D minor, that they understand the downbeat is where we are headed each time, and it's always this 3-1. The beat 3 is catapulting you into beat 1. I actually think that's one of the great things about this. We're going to talk about those leaps, and I think Heller very intentionally wrote this, that you catapult off of the low octave into that big chord. The way he wrote the music dovetails so nicely with the technique that you would work on with your student. Okay, last little typical problem spot is that this dotted rhythm, or it's not actually written dotted, it's written as an 8th note, 16th rest, 16th, but it feels like 1E and a 2E and a 3E, like a typical dotted 8th, 16th rhythm. That students sometimes make that rhythm sound lazy or more like a triplet. So instead of having something like, it turns into, which I don't think is at all how this piece should sound. That gives it like a relaxed kind of feel instead of this very intense war-like feel. So it does need to have a 3 and a 1E and a 2E and a 3 and a 1. That's another thing to just address at the very beginning. Make sure your student is listening for that precision in their rhythm. Let's talk about leaps. My good friend and colleague Christina Whitlock and I are currently running a cohort of piano teachers through this textbook called Professional Piano Teaching Volume 2 by Janine Jacobson. It's all about intermediate and early advanced teaching. And so far it's been a really great experience. And Chapter 5 is all about technique. She goes through several types of techniques such as scale technique, arpeggio technique, broken and blocked chords, playing loudly, playing softly, and has several thoughts on ways you can practice those particular technical things. So I will link this book in the description, but I wanted to read a quote from the section about playing leaps. She says, "Leaps are difficult due to the fear of not arriving on time or the fear of missing the notes of the leap. This fear causes the arm to tense, which causes missed notes. After several incorrectly played leaps, the mind becomes confused and the pianist is conditioned to perform the leap correctly only some of the time." So to avoid the sequence of events, you can do specific practice techniques that she's recommending in the book. And so I'm going to give you a couple of those as well as a few of my own thoughts. The point that she makes that I thought was such a good reminder is that it's actually not difficult for us to move quickly. There is no problem with our arms moving laterally across the piano very fast. All these muscles up here are able to do that. So the act of moving quickly is not the problem. Landing on the correct chord, in this case, is the problem. So what I would advocate for is that we first really know the chords. If I just take the first phrase, the first 4 measures, instead of always practicing this with the leap, I would just go through what these chords actually are. Downbeat of measure 1, downbeat of measure 2, 3, and 4. And I would have a student pretty much memorize that. You can think about, what chord is it? Well, we start on D, then we go to E7. But more importantly, you want a student to kinesthetically, in their fingers, memorize the shape of how the chord feels, because they're not going to process harmony at this point. They're going to process what does it feel like, as well as what does it look like. So looking at the chord, making sure we're playing the right thing, looking down, feeling it. How does that first chord feel different from the next one that I'm going to play? How does it look different from the next one that I'm going to play? And getting so used to that then once you add the leap in, you know where you're going. So the bottom note is easy, it's just all D, and you're looking here. One way to practice this too is to practice the top part silently, because you have to rely on the look and the feel of where you're going. So playing the bottom note, but then just stopping and silently finding the chord. That, for some reason, for students really forces us to think, am I on the right place? And again, you don't want to build up lots of tension with this. You just want to find the right thing and then kind of relax and shake out. So memorizing where you're going. And then one other important point is that you have to leave the previous note or the first note of the leap early. You cannot physically hold a full quarter note down there and arrive at the top note on time. It's just not possible in a physical world. So giving students permission to play that first note very short, either like an 8th note or like a staccato, just gives them the actual time to arrive at the top note. And that is something that you do have to sometimes explicitly say to people. That note will be shorter. When both hands are moving, particularly if they're moving in opposite directions or a lot of space, then there's some things you can do to just take a minute to figure out what's going on. And I'm going to use that measure 14 to 16 spot to talk about this. I'm not going to play the rhythm, I'm just going to play one iteration of each chord. So for example, starting in the middle of 14, I can take each of those back and forth and figure out a couple of things. Which hand is moving farther? Which way is each hand moving? Are we both moving up or down? Now in this case, they either come in contrary or they move parallel. So let's just kind of break that down. First chord out here. They're both moving a similar amount of direction because they're taking over a note that's there. So like these 2 notes at the bottom of my right hand are the same as the next 2 on the top, and this is the same as the bottom of this one. So just taking the time to identify that, you're not moving off of where you are, You're just trading fingers for it. The right hand has to move a little farther because it's going down to the octave, okay? So thinking through all of that, talking it through with your student, even if it feels pedantic, just saying, we're just gonna spend some time analyzing this and teaching your fingers how far they have to go, teaching your arm how much it's going to travel. Now this next jump is literally an octave up for both hands. So it's the same amount of distance for both hands, in which case I would probably let the right hand move just a little bit ahead of the left hand. The next move is a little bit complicated because the right hand goes to a G octave and the left hand just goes kind of down the octave. It's very similar, but a little bit different in the hands. And then this last one, the right hand moves much more than the left hand does. We are preparing for all this quick movement by understanding how the chords feel, memorizing them kinesthetically, as well as understanding how they look on the keyboard, understanding that keyboard topography, look of the hand, the shape of the hand, memorizing all that before we put in the difficulty of moving quickly. Because if you move too fast with this too early, you just build in poor muscle memory habits. And as Janine Jacobson said, you end up only playing it correctly some of the time. It's not reliably accurate. Hopefully that helps with leaps a little bit. The last really important thing about this piece is playing loudly. Heller has marked the first dynamic as fortissimo with a crescendo. So my younger students like to practice saying fortissimo, and we're gonna do a lot of fortissimo, or at least forte and fortissimo. This is where talking with your students about how they use their body, their posture is so important. I was just working with a 17-year-old student this week about opening up her clavicle, about this part, on a different piece that required a big climactic moment with big chords and octaves. And she noticed a huge difference. Just this tiny little, pull in, if your posture is just a little bit contracted this way, really limits how much you can do from here down. So sitting with beautiful tall posture and thinking that this is open allows your arms to move freely, and you can get all this space, as well as then get the power that comes up from your entire back. Encouraging students to sit with what I believe the Alexander technique folks call a tripod, that your 2 feet are 2 of the legs of the tripod, and then you can picture that your spine continues down through the bench to the floor to make that 3rd leg of the tripod. When you're playing the pedal, it's still a tripod, but you might want to try some of these activities with both feet firmly on the floor, because that's just going to set you up for moving all over the keyboard. So then just experimenting with how much of my natural arm weight, my natural body weight, can I allow to fall into the keys. Louder sounds at the piano are caused by a faster attack. So if you're using gravity, thinking that the weight is falling into the keys, it will naturally fall quickly, but with a more warm and beautiful tone. This is also impacted by follow through. If you picture a baseball player swinging a bat, they don't stop the bat at the point of contact with the ball. It goes all the way through. And we can think the same thing about playing a chord, and then the energy follows through into the piano like this. That is a warmer sound, which is going to be impossible to hear on YouTube, but that's a warmer sound than if I just go straight down and lock into position. That's a harsher sound. There are times for a harsher sound, but in general, I want my students to know how to make a big, beautiful, warm sound at the piano. And the torso can move, over towards your left side on top of your left thigh, and over on your right side toward the top of, over on your right thigh. One last idea for getting power out of big chords. You can actually be as crazy as to stand up and practice playing like this, because it gives you more of the sensation of your body weight actually falling into the keys when you're not supporting yourself on the bench. And so you can feel that whole body falling into the keys. So that's a fun, bizarre way to experiment with your student in a lesson. You could also just have them sit very high by putting the bench very high and putting books underneath them, so that they're in kind of this position sitting down, and see if they can still feel that body, that torso weight going through that open posture, through their arms into the keys and following through from there. A lot of that is going to be needed to be evaluated in the moment in the lesson, with the teacher listening and the student listening for how harsh or how warm their tone is. And that's not something I can address on a YouTube video, but I'd encourage you to open up your ears and take time to really listen. There are so many amazing things to work on in this one very appealing piece at the upper intermediate level. I would encourage you, if you've never taught it and you have a student who would enjoy this, to try it out. And as I mentioned, it is listed on my Not Ready Yet resource. This resource has 10 pieces that are the most requested by students. Things like Clair de Lune, Rondo alla Turca, the Chopin E-flat Nocturne, and others. And it gives you ideas for excerpts, arrangements, and alternative preparatory repertoire that your students can play, so that if they're not ready to play that great advanced classic yet, they can still enjoy learning in a way that will prepare them to play it well down the road. I'll have many things listed and linked in the description of this video below. If you have questions, please feel free to leave a comment, and I wish you all the best in your teaching and playing.